Hello, let's get going. Welcome. I would like to introduce Professor Mark Bush, who is the guy next to my left. The Carl F. Landiger, I mean, what a name you got.
I know.
Did you pay to get that name?
Yeah.
That's a very sophisticated name you got. Well, let's call him the Professor of International Business Diplomacy at the neighboring school of a little bit lower reputation, the Walsh School of Foreign Service, and you're also Professor of Government.
And Professor of Business, too.
Well, you have too many titles. Anyway, it is my privilege and honor to introduce you to my good friend, Mark Bush.
So I've titled my talk Globalization 3.0. My hope is to convince you that the day of the politically naive business manager is over, and that you're going to have to see the global economy in a brand new way moving forward. For me, globalization is going to be market access. That's it. I don't really care about industries in particular. I care about business issues across industries. That's what I'm going to try and convey today. And I want to introduce you to some rules. We either believe in a rules-based global economy or we don't. To believe in it means that you have to know some rules, and to arbitrage rules is potentially one of the most exciting prospects going forward. So I'm going to give you globalization 1.0. You're going to have to keep your eyes fixated because this is going to disappear real fast. This is my fear about what most MBA programs teach globalization as being. It's a flat earth, it's a borderless world. Here it is. This is that world. Here's Magellan. Magellan's going to go for a sail. He doesn't really know longitude. He's not coming home. He doesn't know that yet. But he knows that wherever he lands, he's going to have to engage in trade. His men will be dying of scurvy. The supplies will have run out. So there he goes. Travels to the New World, and he engages in trade. We're going to call it Old World apples for New World oranges. He has an implicit exchange rate in mind. It's funny, when you read Vancouver, when you read any of these great explorers, they always had an exchange rate in mind. They didn't know who they were going to meet, but they had an implicit exchange rate. He either makes a trade or he doesn't. That's a flat earth, that's a borderless world. If you can physically get there and trade, you're in. Then it's gone. Blink of an eye. And it's going to morph into something different as globalization 2.0 because of one thing. A government's born. That government's going to screw everything up. That government is going to have three options for raising central budget revenue. It's going to be its entire raison d'etre. That government can tax people, companies, or trade. Let's think about door number one, tax people. That's hard. You had better have some kind of social contract in mind. Few governments can boast that they do. Here's an interesting statistic. First 2 times they sent tax collectors into the countryside in Tunisia, they never came back. It's hard to tax people. Let's look at door number 2, companies. Now you'd better have a big and enforceable tax code. Now you're going to have all the inversion questions that we have today, but it's that enforcement mechanism that's going to be really elusive. Taxing companies, that's not any easier than taxing people. That leaves us with trade. To tax trade, all I need is a guy on the wharf. That's why most developing countries to this day disproportionately derive their central budget revenue through taxes on trade in the form of a tariff. It was true in this country until the US Civil War. 80% of Washington's central budget was derived through tariffs. Most of that, whiskey and wine. In fact, you take out whiskey and tariffs on whiskey, you've got no modern nation state until well into the 20th century. Taxes on trade. That government abroad is going to impose a tariff wall because it wants central budget revenue, and now Magellan's trip was a little more complicated. Now Magellan sails, He hits the tariff wall, the trade isn't good, he sails home, and he demands that his government retaliate. That is the single most axiomatic dynamic in today's global economy. Governments knew that they had to solve this problem, which is only compounded, especially for democracies, by the fact that we've got to elect these people. So any government's going to balance two things: electoral support and social welfare. Think about social welfare as GDP growth. Think about it as privatization, market liberalization, what have you. And electoral support is just doing whatever the most politically influential industries want you to do. And by and large, that gives the upper hand to import competing constituents who are going to vote against globalization. Most business schools chalk that up as political economy, and they move on. That's supposed to be the big residual error term. That's what screws everything up, and managers kind of nod and wink and move on as if it wasn't true. But that never works well. Few businesses brag about the fact that that's how they wrote off those concerns. In fact, the concerns are entirely knowable because electoral support is going to split into two things itself. Believe it or not, governments actually talk in the language of offensive interests, meaning export-oriented, and defensive interests, meaning import-competing. They're going to balance the two. They're going to weigh in on the side that's most politically influential and the side that has mobilized to vote at the ballot box. But deep down, governments still want to answer the demand of social welfare. So welcome to Globalization 2.0. Here's what happens. They get a tariff wall, I get a tariff wall, and like in Greece or Ireland, no one votes for austerity. No one's going to vote for free trade unless there's a way to deflect blame for doing so. So in 1947, at least on the trade side of things, they're going to develop something called the World Trade Organization. It's not going to go by that name until 1995, but that's what they're going to get. Something called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And the countries are going to make two promises to each other. They're going to cap all their tariffs under what are called tariff bindings, and they're going to promise that over successive rounds of negotiations, they're going to bring the tariff wall down, all in the name of deflecting blame. They're going to be able to say to their domestic electorate, I didn't vote for free trade. Free trade was hoisted upon us by faceless bureaucrats in Geneva. Same logic is going to work right now in Greece or Ireland with respect to the IMF. Great. They're going to build two axioms in 1947. The axioms are referred to as most favored nation status and national treatment. MFN says no discrimination across countries that are members of the WTO. That's why China joins the WTO in 2001, Russia in 2012. No discrimination. So long as they're a member of the institution, they get the same deal as everyone else. I, as the United States, cannot favor Argentine trade over Brazilian trade. So long as they trade in a like good, they're treated exactly the same. We've had MFN for hundreds of years. What they were bold about in 1947 was national treatment. This says, whatever I do to foreign, I had better well do to domestic or it's illegal. No asymmetrical treatment, foreign versus domestic, on anything. It's that second bit of law that's going to open up the global economy. That is, at a minimum, the one right that you should know that you have. Wherever you do global business as trade or investment, you have national treatment. Problem is, in 1947, they never envisioned 2014. They created the architecture to make 2014 possible, but they never saw what was coming. We now have a two-tier global economy. Not only is it not borderless and not flat, it's two-tier. The first way in which it's two-tier is that thing called MFN. This is the actual language of MFN. Any advantage, favor, privilege, or immunity given to one is given to all. It's supposed to be the best deal in town. And in 1947, it was. But in 1947, they did something really weird. They said, here's MFN, but one day we can imagine something even better than MFN. We could imagine super MFN. And super MFN is better than MFN. I'll give you a real example in just a second. Now, if you're a poor country, you get to bypass MFN by virtue of something in the United States and in 10 other countries called the Generalized System of Preferences. But if you're a rich country, there's only one way you get around MFN. You sign a free trade deal, what's called a preferential trade agreement. That gives you super MFN in a world of MFN. There's your two-tier global economy. And put it this way, business does not vote for MFN anymore. Business wants super MFN. That's why we have a two-tier global economy by virtue of these things, these preferential trade deals. Now let me show you what's at stake. India has emerged as the single largest market on earth for whiskey by volume. They've just overtaken France. The European Union has just concluded negotiating a free trade deal with India, and here's one of the things the EU got. Scotch goes in at a tariff of 150%. That is a super MFN tariff. Now your thought is, what the hell kind of super MFN deal is that? Take a look at what the MFN tariff line is, $750. That's what I pay if I'm American bourbon, Tennessee, or the unclassified stuff like Stranahan's. Bourbon, Tennessee. They go into the Indian market at 750% tariff. That's the MFN line. The super MFN line for Scotch, 150. Now India's going to cheat. The Scotch Whisky Association estimates that when you throw back in all the internal taxes and charges, India will be closer to 300%, not 150. But it looks good on paper. Here's one other thing that India did on a super MFN basis. It finally recognized Scotch as a geographical indication of Scotland. That enshrines the designation as intellectual property, meaning, like a patent, a trademark, a copyright, or an industrial design, Scotch is protected as intellectual property. The definition of Scotch we'll take up in just a second. Korea did the same thing. In Korean and English, Korea said, fine, we'll give it to you. Scotch can only come from Scotland. As you know, lots of countries make a single malt whiskey, but God help them if they call it Scotch. You can call it Scooch, but you can't call it Scotch. Actually, you probably can't call it Scooch. Here's what the US wants, even though it's a little bit problematic. The US, under all preferential trade agreements, is now demanding bourbon in Tennessee. Now, Tennessee makes sense, except that Jack Daniels has decided to define Tennessee as according to the Lincoln process, which means you run the whiskey through charcoal filter. If that definition holds, though, most Tennessee whiskey is no longer Tennessee whiskey. Here's the big issue. Bourbon is not a region. These things are called geographical indications. Bourbon is not a region. Yes, I know you're thinking Bourbon County, Kentucky. No. Bourbon County, at the moment of Confederation in the United States, included most of Virginia. I do not have to be based in Kentucky to make bourbon. I just have to be in the United States. But bourbon itself is not a region. Now, that really riles India, because right now, India wants a geographical indication on basmati rice. But basmati is not a region. The US refuses to give basmati to India, but it wants bourbon. A little bit of a tension there. Here's the new economic geography of the global economy. That's a map of super MFN market access. Super, not regular. There's only 4 jurisdictions on earth that don't have super MFN. The redder the country, the more super MFN you've got. For those of you thinking about your global business project, think about Chile. That's the most super MFN on offer outside of Singapore. Chile, as a result, has a great way of attracting foreign direct investment. It says to businesses around the world, why in your right mind would you go to Argentina? Come to Chile, we'll give you super MFN into Argentina and the rest of Mercosur and China. It's a hell of a sell. This is the US map. I always love to tell my MEAs, this map is about to fundamentally change in the next 2 years. You will not believe what's about to happen in the next 2 years. US business, the US economy will forever be altered in 2 years' time. Now that's the map at present, and it's relatively boring. It's the Monroe Doctrine South, and it's a reward for any country that hosted an American war in the Middle East. It's boring, but it's about to change. Here's the map everyone's watching. There's China. China is in love with preferential trade deals right now. It's currently negotiating 20 free trade deals. The Chinese economy will forever change super MFN almost instantaneously. They don't have to worry about something we have to worry about here in the United States. I serve on a committee for the USTR. We worry about something called ratification. China does not worry about ratification. They can do this much faster. Here are the two big deals the US is negotiating right now. We're negotiating TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership on your left, and TTIP, which is US-EU on the right. On the left, take a look at the countries involved. Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. Relatively innocuous list in the sense that the US already has free trade deals with most of those countries. The only pickup super MFN is Japan. And now that Abe has called a snap election, the timeline for this one is a little up in the air because he's not going to have as much political power after as he does today. But the neat thing about TPP is it's designed to grow, and everyone's lining up to join that free trade deal. India was in town 2 weeks ago. India wants in. Taiwan wants in. Korea has said they'll be in within 1 year's time. And the biggest development that will never work any other way, politically speaking, China wants in. On the right-hand side, that's TTIP, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. That is US-EU. The US must get that free trade deal because Canada just got that free trade deal with Europe. We must match Canada. We match Canada on Korea. We match Canada on Singapore. We have to. Otherwise, NAFTA doesn't work. So all the balls are in motion. That, by the way, is virtually 2/3 of global wealth. Don't underestimate those two deals. Remember, what they mean is super MFN outbound, but super MFN inbound. Hyper competition within 2 years' time. Here's a strange deal. Japan, Korea, and China are negotiating one. Believe it or not, the Chinese, they say we could have that deal done in 6 months. The Japanese are exhausted. They joined TPP late. I met with their negotiators last summer. They are absolutely beside themselves. They can't keep up. They're also fearful that China's going to shortchange them on intellectual property under this free trade deal. Let's talk about cheating, about national treatment. Again, your most crucial right in today's global economy. This is what the language says on fiscal weapons. It says, once you've paid a tariff, you are not allowed to be charged any internal tax or other charge that domestic isn't also hit with. This prevents backfilling. Think about it this way. Take away a government's tariff, guess what they're going to do? Hit you with internal charges. That's what the drug industry is up against right now in India. In India, they still have a 25 to 40% tariff on pharmaceuticals. But then they get you a 19% value-added tax, 5% internal charge. In Sudan, that internal charge is called military fund. You actually have US pharma companies contributing to something called the military fund as an internal tax. This concerns like goods. My good has to be like your good in order to enjoy this right. Question then is, what's a like good? Well, that's for litigation to decide, but the first ever example was the one I showed you with Magellan. Are apples and oranges like goods? They're both fruit. They both potentially fulfill a need to eat. They might even be eaten under the same type of occasions. We get a lot of litigation over this. The two biggest cases have been alcohol cases. Soju and choku, Korea and Japan against whiskey. Question is, are they like? The decision was vodka is like, but nothing else. Even if they're not like, though, the right extends to anything that's directly competitive or substitutable. So I'm free and clear on fiscal weapons. No government can unduly target foreign versus domestic with fiscal weapons to backfill on tariffs. There's one, there's the other, but you know they're going to cheat. How do you cheat? You cheat as follows. This is Uruguay. Uruguay wants a big tax on scotch, a little tax on domestic whiskey. They can't write legislation that says big tax on scotch, little tax on domestic whiskey. So ingeniously, Uruguay says, we're going to tag the taxation to years of maturation. If the product sits in a cask for 2 years, low tax. If the product sits in a cask for 3 or more years, really big tax. Anyone know why they chose that point of demarcation? Because of scotch. That's the single best bottle of scotch that ever was. That's Bruichladdich Octomore 2.2. This is the first page of the legal definition of scotch. That's page 1. I want to show you what Uruguay knew. Scotch is legally defined as 3 years or more. You see what Uruguay's doing? They can't go foreign versus domestic, so they're picking on characteristics that are perfectly correlated with country of origin. Brilliant. It didn't work. There's one other line item. Item I. You see I? Scotch can't be sold anywhere in the world for less than 40% alcohol by volume. So you know what Chile did? Chile's domestic whiskey is 37%. They had a cut point at 38%. Anything 38% or less, low tax. 39% or more, high tax. Perfectly correlated with country of origin. Rich countries don't play games with fiscal weapons. They use non-fiscal weapons. They use regulatory politics. This is the whole hang-up in US-EU. We don't hit each other with taxes and tariffs. We don't have a lot outside of agriculture. We ban trade with each other when we don't like each other's health and safety standards, when we don't like the color of the backup light on a tractor, when we don't like the height of a seatbelt in a car. That's when we ban trade, US-EU. They knew that was coming in 1947, so they drafted this text. It says, don't do it. You're not allowed to use any of those non-fiscal weapons, none of them. But you know that countries are going to cheat. That's a pretty sweeping statement. All laws, all regulations, all requirements. If the US-EU free trade deal fails, it's because of that. They can't do it. Now, here's how I cheat. Imagine there's a global standard. Call it IEEE, call it ISO, call it REACH. If I want to be protectionist using regulatory politics, there's only 2 ways to do it. I've got to calibrate this carefully to suit my offensive interests as well. But on the defense, here's strategy number 1. Offer a more stringent standard than the global standard. This is the so-called race to the top. Watch this. There goes Europe. You know that Europe issues 1,000 standards a year? It's estimated that the cost of doing business in Europe, just to comply with EU standards, 10% of production costs. Europe has more words on how to harvest cabbage than are found in the American Constitution. This is a technical slide, so we'll watch it again. That's called the race to the top. This is what China does. China does not race to the top. Watch China. We have no idea what China's doing. The US government affectionately refers to these as China unique standards. The logic is that whether it's wappy Wi-Fi or a white good, just come up with a standard that no one else produces to, use that standard and deter trade, because then exporters will calculate it's not worth the market. Because I have to have two production runs, one that's China unique and one that's rest of world. China can't do this where it has offensive interests, but where it has purely defensive interests, this is easy. These things are prevalent in today's global economy, and no one knows what they are. They're called bilateral investment treaties. Be careful where you invest abroad. Be careful where you do trade abroad. Make sure the US or whatever your home country is has a bilateral investment treaty in place with the host country. It protects you against uncompensated expropriation, and it protects the government from doing anything that has the effect of making your investment wholly unprofitable. Here are the two bilateral investment treaties the United States is currently negotiating. And the pharmaceutical industry is elated about the one with India, because the United States defines intellectual property as an investment. So welcome to Globalization 3.0. I have one WTO, 600 preferential trade deals, and 3,000 bilateral investment treaties. See, Globalization 1.0 was easy. That was the flat earth, the borderless world. If you got there, you traded, good luck. Globalization 2.0, circa 1947, one set of rules. Today, too many rules. And with too many overlapping rules, I get two problems: conflict of laws, conflict of courts. And that breeds a lack of predictability, and business hates a lack of predictability. I got a world that's split MFN versus super MFN, and I've got this whole national treatment and a broader concern in investor rights called fair and equitable. Now all of a sudden, I had better bloody well know what these rules are, or I can't make globalization work. Here's my case study. This case is going to redefine the global economy, and it has nothing to do with tobacco. This is Philip Morris. And Philip Morris has a problem, which is that. That's called plain packaging, and it is the new regime in Australia. I get a horrific image. I'm allowed to say how many cigarettes are in the package, and I get one statement: no other intellectual property is on the label. And if you don't like that, maybe you like one of these. Australia offers 20 different choices. They're all horrible. It's not just happening in tobacco. Thailand is doing this on alcohol. On alcohol, they have suicide, sexual impotence, a couple of other real nasty ones. And the logic is, this is all in pursuit of a legitimate public policy: curbing tobacco, curbing alcohol. But Philip Morris has no business model where it doesn't have the ability to express itself through intellectual property on the label. So PMI is busy, not directly but indirectly. It's suing at present the government of Australia for expropriation of assets through a bilateral investment treaty, Hong Kong and Australia. In other words, Philip Morris is arguing that that is tantamount to expropriation of assets. And because PMI does business in Hong Kong, and because PMI is also in Australia, it has standing under a bilateral investment treaty between the two countries to sue Australia for damages. And that case is at the World Bank, not in an Australian court. Here's the WTO litigation. This is case number one. It's Ukraine versus Australia. Ukraine. Ukraine. This is Ukraine's first ever WTO case. And it's about as complicated as it gets. This is pure IP, pure labeling. Word on the street is that PMI is doing all the legal analysis and paying all the legal bills for Ukraine. This is truly complicated stuff. You don't easily do this. And everyone else in the world is in on this case. The EU is there, the US is there, and it has nothing to do with tobacco. Fundamentally, this case will redo the global economy because the issue is intellectual property an offensive or a defensive right? Australia says it's defensive. Australia says we can do whatever we want to remove your IP from the label. So long as we don't give your trademark to someone else, we haven't violated your defensive right. PMI says no. Intellectual property is an offensive right. It is the means by which we engage our customer. That is, believe it or not, the issue here. And the whole world wants in on this case because, well, sure, they're interested in health, but they're really worried about IP. Now, all of a sudden, PMI, as a tobacco company, becomes the darling of every patent holder. Ukraine isn't the only country to sue. Everyone else has jumped in. Honduras, the DR. Put it this way, no one even knew Cuba was a member of the WTO. And then Indonesia. Indonesia's there for the most concrete reason. Philip Morris is the second largest employer in Indonesia, second only to the government of Indonesia. Big case. We're 2 years out. The WTO has now announced that a first verdict will be due Q1 2016. Watch everyone's reaction to this verdict. This will reverberate well through the global economy. The issue has nothing to do with tobacco. Cigarettes are not the crux of the matter. This is IP and a label. One funny story along the way, and to reveal cards, I am a consultant to PMI. The olive industry in Australia is irate that the government of Australia calls the plain packaging olive green and olive drab. The olive industry says the name is bad for business. However, one funny thing is that the Australian olive industry should be quiet about this because Australian olives are disproportionately Kalamata olives. Kalamata olives are the intellectual property of Greece. The louder Australia gets, the more likely Europe is to sue Australia over intellectual property infringement on olives. When a battle over olives is triggered over a battle over tobacco that has nothing to do with tobacco, that's a rules-based global economy. Here's the payoff for PMI. New Zealand just blinked. New Zealand has backed down from implementing the same legislation as Australia, pending all the litigation. PMI celebrates this as being proof positive that the rule of law can work for companies on a global scale. This is the opposite of I know a guy who can get us into that market. This is rule of law. This makes the global economy predictable and stable. I want to give you two last issues to think about because globalization is really easy to stop. I want to show you how easy it is. It's just naive to think about a borderless world of flat Earth. It really is. Life on the defense is so easy. If you know some rules, you can shut down global commerce. Here's way one. This is Mexico against the United States, and the case is so boring on its face. It's all over tuna. But it's a really cool issue that you're all going to one day experience directly or indirectly because of the logic, not the industry. You see the dolphin safe label? You can't sell tuna in the United States unless it's dolphin safe. The United States will not give Mexico the dolphin safe label. That's because in the eastern tropics, Mexico fishes with a certain kind of net that's designed to be used around where dolphins are feeding. Where dolphins are feeding, tuna are under the water. So by virtue of the technology, the US will not give Mexico the label. If you don't have the label, you're not selling in the United States. It's really that easy. This is not a tax on trade, this is a ban on trade. Mexico says, wait, this is not fair. We too love dolphins. In fact, Mexico says, we love dolphins more than you do. We abide by a global standard. It's different from your standard, but it's better. Your standard is an assumption. Our standard is empirically verified. On every Mexican boat, the captain and a third-party auditor must both agree that no dolphins were killed in the catch. If that's true, then the catch is sellable, dolphin safe, anywhere in the world except the United States. This is called the non-product PPM. PPM stands for production process method. There's no health and safety issue here. Please recognize that. No one is alleging that Mexican tuna is unsafe. The US is arguing, we don't like the way you catch the tuna. Do you get the difference? That's the fear. Do you know where this is going? We don't doubt that your cars work. We just don't like the carbon footprint in the manufacturing process of your cars. That's a non-product PPM. We don't doubt your idea. We don't like the way you treat your scientists. That's the issue. This is like an IQ test here. This is my second case. Does that make sense? Non-product PPM. It's not what the good is. It's not the health and safety. It's we don't like how you made it. The cars, that's not far-fetched. For anyone who watched what Europe tried to do, ETS, the tradable permit scheme on carbon on airlines, that's where they got the logic. This is something called country of origin, and this scares me even more. The US is right now trying to figure out how to comply with this loss. This has to do with Mexican, Canadian, and American cows. And here's the story. My slaughterhouses in the United States, they source from all three. And the slaughterhouse doesn't care where the cow comes from. They just want cheap cows. Quality, sure, but cheap. But US ranchers care where the cows come from. And the ranchers would like it such that slaughterhouses prefer domestic to foreign beef. Problem is, there's no fiscal weapon available. NAFTA offers Mexico and Canada super MFN into the US. So the US ranchers have to figure out a scheme that makes it profitable, relatively speaking, to sequester American from foreign beef. Here's how you do it. You argue that your consumers want to know where the cow comes from. That's going to lead to the following effect. All three cows go into the system, and all slaughterhouses depend on all three cows. The American cow, let's see what happens with the American cow. It goes in, it comes out, and it gets a letter A. The three criteria here are born, raised, slaughtered. It's born in the US, it's raised in the US, it's slaughtered in the US. And if all three are US, that steak gets an A. A does not mean grade. A just means all American. A is American. Watch what happens for the Mexican and the Canadian cow. They go into the system, they come out the other side, and they get a, well, we don't really know. D means born, raised, slaughtered abroad. But few cows processed in the United States are actually D. All the action is B and C. B means born abroad, but the cow quickly renounced its citizenship, migrated to the United States, swore allegiance to the US flag, and was promptly slaughtered on American soil. C means the cow was born abroad, it equivocated. In fact, the cow might have actually been born in the United States, we're not quite sure, but whatever happened, for a short duration, defined as about 20 weeks, it ventured off onto this foreign soil, but came home after it saw the light and was slaughtered in the United States. Does it make sense? No, it doesn't. Not to anyone. least of all to consumers, because there's a carve-out. If you don't sell a certain volume of meat, you don't have to do this system. If you make ready-to-eat food, you don't have to do this system. And those slaughterhouses, I don't know if you thought this one through yet, but they don't do A on Monday, B on Tuesday, C on Wednesday, D on Thursday, and then something on Friday. They're doing all every day. Given the volume, it is potentially conceivable that A doesn't qualify A because it was done right after a run of B. It's called commingling. Here's my fear about this. 70 countries right now do country of origin labeling. 10 on meat, 60 non-meat. You can do this on anything. And you know who's doing this right now? India to Hewlett-Packard. India is demanding that Hewlett-Packard explain itself input by input, plant by plant. Country of origin labeling. In the limit, A is autarky. I've just taken out your supply chain. Ricardo likes to say, global supply chain. Sure, but if I'm Solar World and I don't like the advantage you derive from your supply chain, I'll shut it down. Solar World's about to do this. This is easy. Life on the defense is easy. I can completely undermine the credibility of your supply chain by doing this, a couple of trade remedies, get you on anti-dumping, call it a day. A, autarky. You add country of origin to non-product PPM, globalization isn't happening. Simple. It's real simple. So let me show you where this all ends. This is globalization 3.0. Now Magellan needs a rule book. Now he sails. And he gets to this new world, still doesn't know longitude. He either trades nothing because he doesn't understand the rules. And remember, the regulatory stuff, the non-fiscal stuff, that's a ban. That's not a tax. If you don't understand the rules, you trade nothing. But if you do, you trade a lot. Hopefully super MFN. That's today's global economy. And my plea to you, and it's my plea in my IBD gateway to my MBAs every year, do not be that MBA who knows a guy who can get you into that country. Get a sense for the rules. Because all these efforts are being negotiated for business. This is not abstract government stuff. This is for business. If you know what these rules look like and you understand some of your rights, globalization is a lot more predictable and stable than otherwise. Thanks, and we can take some questions. One at a time, please. Yeah. Hi, David.
You talked about globalization 3.0 and how complex this system of rules become. Say PMI lose something with your help, there's no way to, let's say they lose, and then IP is no longer protected. How do we ensure trade with globalization 4.0?
4.0 is the telos that would be wonderful if we get there. It's where the de facto MFN line becomes the super MFN line of today, and we get one region, which is global free trade. So imagine that I got Chile. Chile is a member of a whole bunch of free trade deals. It has bilaterals with Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Chile is not a member of NAFTA, but de facto it is. Okay? The more I get blending of everyone's trade deal de facto, the closer I get to the MFN line being irrelevant. Now it's just de facto super MFN for everyone. That's globalization 4.0. I won't live to see it. I have too many kids to send to college. I don't want to see it anytime soon. I like the complexity. I need to arbitrage these rules. So I'm all for more complexity. But that's globalization 4.0. A ratcheting up of MFN to super, and we live under one block, which is global free trade. That'd be my hope. By the way, Harley-Davidson, they just got banned from Egypt. Harley-Davidson is, in my view, the prototypical corporate philosophy about globalization. Harley-Davidson is of the view that if a country is above a certain per capita wealth threshold, they will buy motorcycles. That's their business model. They export freedom. That's their business slogan. By the way, China has asked them, freedom with respect to whom? Egypt this year banned all motorcycles, and all three-wheel tuk-tuks. Anyone know why? All motorcycles, all three-wheel tuk-tuks. They're banned, all new sales for 1 year, all new parts for 3 months. Any guesses? Yeah, Harley had no idea either. They could not believe this happened to them. It turns out that the Egyptian government has established that most people who are assassinated from the back of a motorcycle. The strategy is as follows. And you know this logic because you've all seen Bond and Bourne Supremacy. If you're going to shoot someone on a crowded Egyptian street, you're going to do it from the back of a motorcycle to blend into traffic really quickly. That's why Egypt did it. So here's Harley's response. Our motorcycles cost $100,000 in Egypt. No one has ever been shot from the back of a $100,000 motorcycle in Egypt. But Harley had no idea how to fight against this, and so now it is desperately scrambling to come up with a new product category legally recognized called the luxury motorcycle market to match the luxury car market. Because while it is true that most people who are shot by assassins are shot from the back of a two-wheel motorcycle, those motorcycles are not 500cc displacement. They're 30cc displacement. And Harley would like them separated. I have one other effort that they were pretty sure I was drunk when I proposed this, but I wasn't. Think about it. They've banned 2 wheels. They've banned 3 wheels. My proposal, ship the motorcycle with training wheels. And when the bike arrives in Egypt, the retailer takes off the training wheel. That's not Harley's problem. The only other way to do this is to block line of sight for a rifle by having a rod that comes up the back so that you can't get a clear shot from the back of the motorcycle. But the Egyptian government has been less receptive to that. Someone had a hand up back here. Yeah.
I understand the possible difficulties with the Australia thing.
Yeah.
But is there a worry that if you go the route, if that is struck down and you go that route, that countries won't be able to make any regulation on any product because it could be seen as an IP infringement?
That's why ISDS under investor rights is under fire right now. That's why Australia has come out and said no investor-state dispute settlement under the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You all know there's nothing popular about business and globalization right now. And the fear is, yeah, business now, because of PMI, has the upper hand fighting against anything, even if it is a legitimate public policy. However, the WTO speak for this is you are allowed to pursue a legitimate public policy, but you have to have science to back it up. And you pursue that legitimate public policy in the least trade restrictive way. Right now, there's no evidence that the label for PMI is doing anything to curb tobacco consumption. In fact, PMI has one study showing that tobacco sales are up. In fact, it's reduced their advertising burden, so sales are ironically up. But yeah, that is a big fear. The optics of globalization are a problem right now because legitimate public policy, including environmental measures, are being challenged as tantamount to expropriation of assets. You bet. Yes?
How does this whole theory play into lawful spending, right? If I play it out in my head, you may have more have and have nots by whoever I guess has best litigators, right?
Yeah.
How does that sort of play?
So the question is, what would happen absent rule of law? Then we're back to power politics. The distribution of power globally is less endogenous than the distribution of legal resources. So I'd rather be in a rules-based global economy that nonetheless favors those who get it versus a power-based system where the strong take what they can and the weak grant what they must, which is what Thucydides said. So I'm still happier in this world, but I'm in agreement with you that now it becomes a premium on capacity, and capacity becomes everything. And Harley was caught flat-footed, in all honesty. They were not ready. And they are now banned, Harley that is, from 47 metropolitan areas in China. Not because of assassination, but because of carbon emissions. Problem is that China is very discriminatory in that regard because Harley-Davidson motorcycles are more green than most Chinese cars. But they don't ban the cars. So then the question is, what recourse do you have in a country that both Canada and the United States affectionately refer to as a country that is loosely knit together, where rule of law is great in Beijing, not so much inland? It's a challenge. But one of my favorite stories is that the third largest aircraft manufacturer on earth, Bombardier, has a war room down here in DC on K Street. They constantly simulate for these non-market challenges. They know they're going to get hit. The question is it Brazil, the EU, or the US? And I think it's that effort, and one of your former colleagues, Jeff Pardini, is now an MBA at Bombardier. But to get him that job, he had to be fluent in non-market as well as market. That's what I mean by being that politically savvy manager. Know the rules, because they can make it such that you either fight back against Egypt or you just give up. And Harley would prefer not to give up. Yeah?
Is there a multilateral effort to mention at addressing these specific issues in country of origin?
Not really. Not country of origin and not investor rights. We still don't do everything well on a multilateral level. Nothing's going to change that anytime soon. Still do it piecemeal. Yeah? China's 3-5 years out. China won't come on anytime soon. India won't come on anytime soon. Korea's right now. So think about Korea as number 13, and then maybe Taiwan. But Taiwan and China have to work out that dance. So the dance at the WTO was China gets to join first, Taiwan joins second, and then no one talks about Taiwan. That was the deal at the WTO. It's not clear Taiwan will go for that deal right now, but Taiwan doesn't like US preferences on agriculture anyway. They're not rushing to join either. The interesting thing after the lame duck session is, will anyone talk trade finally? The Republicans would love to humiliate Obama by giving him trade promotion authority. So it'll be really interesting to see, although in the meeting between Mitch McConnell and Obama after the midterms, they didn't say anything about trade. So we have to see. But none of this is going to get done. Obama's message is all text has to be done within a year. And we're actually under negotiating instructions to act as if he has trade promotion authority. That he doesn't is a minor nuisance. But we're being told to negotiate as if he does. That's what we're doing. So the texts are almost done for TTIP and TPP. Whether they're politically sellable, that's going to depend on whether someone starts investing some resources on the Hill to sell the idea of free trade. Hopefully they will. Great. Thanks for your time. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. I hope that you appreciate the value of this type of presentations, especially in light of the fact that it introduces a new set of variables, a new vision, a new perspective as to what doing global business is all about. So yeah, I know. I was about to criticize you, but in any event, thank you, Mark, for doing this.
Thank you.